picture this, right? You've saved up for years.
Yeah.
You've planned the itinerary down to the absolute hour, and you are finally in Paris. You walk into the Louvre, you navigate this total maze of endless echoing corridors, and you step into that specific room, the Salle des États, to see the Mona Lisa.
Right, the pinnacle of the trip.
Exactly. The most famous painting in human history. And what do you actually see when you get in there?
Well, it's certainly not the painting.
No.
Yeah.
Not the enigmatic smile, not the masterful brushstrokes Da Vinci spent literal years perfecting. You see this solid, glowing wall of smartphones.
Yeah. It's just a sea of screens.
150 people jostling, throwing elbows, posing with, duck lips, snapping selfies with their backs completely turned to the art. The painting itself is this tiny little postage stamp in the distance, trapped behind bulletproof glass, completely obscured by the glare of camera flashes.
It's totally disconnected from the art itself at that point.
Completely. The experience you traveled all that way for that intimacy with a masterpiece, that moment of quiet reflection is just eradicated. The Mona Lisa has, for all practical purposes, ceased to exist as an original work of art. It's just been downgraded to a photo backdrop.
And the fascinating thing is the physical asset on the wall hasn't changed a bit.
Right.
The canvas, the paint, the frame, they are perfectly preserved in climate control. But the subjective value of the experience has been diluted down to almost zero by the sheer unmanaged volume of consumption.
Wow. Yeah.
The product is essentially consuming itself.
That exact frustration, that crushing moment of realization where you wonder why you even bothered leaving your house, that is our entry point today.
Yeah.
We are going on a really intensive deep dive into a massive global puzzle that affects almost every major city on Earth.
It really does.
And we are using the newly released OECD Tourism Trends and Policies 2026 report as our foundational anchor for this. We're also going to layer in some frankly staggering economic context from the World Travel and Tourism Council, the WTTC.
The data there is just wild.
It is. And the mission today is to tackle a central, incredibly provocative question. How should a destination measure success in an industry where the product actively becomes less valuable the more people consume it?
What's fascinating here is that we aren't just having another, moralizing conversation about over-tourism or generic sustainability.
Those words are everywhere.
Yeah, they've been stripped of all meaning at this point.
Yeah.
They just get thrown around as corporate buzzwords on brochures. What we are unpacking today is a fundamental business strategy and governance problem.
Okay, let's unpack this. What do you mean by a governance problem?
Well, we are looking at how an entire global sector is just white-knuckling its grip on completely outdated ways of defining what success looks like, and how that refusal to adapt the dashboard is systematically destroying the very inventory they are trying to sell. It is, at its core, a crisis of measurement.
A crisis of measurement. I like that. Let's put some hard numbers on this addiction to growth. Because to understand why destinations from Kyoto to Barcelona to Maui are struggling so hard with the sheer volume of human bodies, we first have to look at the economic engine driving that volume.
The incentives.
Exactly. We need to talk about what the sources call the industrial hangover. When we talk about tourism, we aren't talking about a cute niche sector of people taking summer holidays anymore. We are talking about an absolute economic juggernaut.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you open the WTTC economic impact data for 2025, the scale is almost difficult to wrap your head around. Travel and tourism contributed $11.6 trillion to the global GDP.
Wait, 11.6 trillion. That's trillion with a T.
Trillion with a T.
That is, that's incomprehensible money.
To put that in perspective, that represents 9.8% of the entire global economy.
Nearly 10% of all money moving around the planet is travel and tourism.
Yes. And it's growing at 4.1% year on year, which means it is outpacing overall global economic growth by almost 50%. And when you look at the labor market, the sector supports 366 million jobs globally.
366 million.
That is 1 in every 9 people on this planet who goes to work in the morning. 1 in 9 works in travel and tourism. Furthermore, it accounts for 1 in 3 new jobs created worldwide. It is just this compounding growth machine.
Okay, with numbers that massive, it becomes glaringly obvious why political systems, economic systems, local municipalities are completely addicted to continuous growth in this space.
How could they not be?
Right. If you're a mayor looking at a budget deficit or a prime minister trying to boost employment numbers right before an election, you look at those WTTC numbers and say, give me more of that.
Exactly. Build another airport terminal.
Dredge the harbor so we can fit a bigger cruise ship. The incentives are entirely aligned with infinite physical expansion.
The macroeconomic incentives demand more bodies in beds, more passports stamped, more tax revenue generated, and, more geopolitical soft power projected. The system is structurally designed to reward volume, period.
But this introduces what the OECD sources frame as the core anomaly of modern tourism. The industry has inherited an industrial logic of growth.
Right.
For the last, 70 years, the key performance indicators, the KPIs, have been metrics like international arrivals, hotel occupancy rates, and airport throughput. It's a factory mindset.
It really is.
Let me use an analogy to make this concrete for you. In traditional manufacturing, say you run a factory making smartphones. Increasing your volume reduces your average costs.
Economies of scale.
Exactly. You achieve economies of scale. If you manufacture 1 million phones instead of 10,000, your per unit cost drops, your profit margin widens, and you basically win capitalism.
Right, because the inputs are standard.
Yeah. But tourism isn't manufacturing. It is an experience economy. The inputs of tourism aren't steel or plastic or microchips. The inputs are authenticity, cultural atmosphere, uncrowded heritage sites, the quiet vibe of a local neighborhood.
Yes, the intangibles.
Those aren't manufactured goods you can stamp out on an assembly line.
Yeah.
They are fragile, finite stocks.
And that is where the industry fundamentally misunderstands what it is actually selling.
How so?
Well, the industry thinks it is selling hotel beds and airline seats, and those things can be scaled. But it is actually selling access to a localized experience, which cannot be scaled infinitely.
Oh, I see.
In conventional manufacturing, the value delivered to one consumer doesn't degrade the value delivered to the next. Me buying a smartphone doesn't make your smartphone operate any slower.
Right.
But in an experience economy based on fragile stocks, increasing visitor volume beyond a specific threshold actively reduces the quality of the core product. The traditional KPIs, those arrivals and occupancy rates we just talked about, are structurally incapable of detecting this value destruction.
Because they're only counting the units.
Exactly. They count the units moving down the assembly line, but they're totally blind to the fact that the assembly line is literally catching fire.
Let's bring the OECD 2026 report into this, because I want to stress that this isn't some abstract academic debate happening in a university faculty lounge. This is playing out in city halls right now.
Oh, absolutely. The OECD report serves as a perfect anchor here because it operates at the highest level of international policy. They document that international tourist arrivals to OECD countries hit record levels recently, reaching 819.5 million in 2024.
Almost 1 billion people crossing borders just in those countries.
Yeah. But the tone of the 2026 report is distinctly alarmed. They emphasize that this incredibly strong demand is actively testing the resilience of destinations.
They use the word resilience.
They do. The OECD is explicitly calling for more strategic approaches that balance economic, social, and environmental outcomes. They are waving a massive red flag, stating that the old metrics are catastrophically insufficient for the reality of the late 2020s.
Okay, but if the dashboard is flashing red and everyone from the macroeconomists at the OECD down to, the tourist getting elbowed in the Louvre knows that just counting heads is destroying the product, why haven't we changed the dashboard?
That's the million-dollar question.
Why is a mayor in 2026 still issuing press releases bragging about a 5% increase in summer arrivals?
It comes down to a concept called political legibility.
Legibility?
Yeah. Think about it from the perspective of a minister of tourism or a destination management organization, a DMO. Traditional volume metrics are incredibly easy to communicate to a lay public.
Oh, I get it. The billboard test?
Exactly. A politician can buy a billboard that says, we brought 2 million more visitors to our state this year, creating 5,000 jobs. It sounds like an undeniable objective victory. It's legible. The voter completely understands it.
It's an easy win.
But on the other hand, how do you put, we successfully maintained our psychological carrying capacity and increased destination brand equity on a campaign flyer?
You can't. People would just drive right past it.
Right. It doesn't translate into political capital.
It's the path of least resistance. You hit the easy button because the complex reality requires a 20-minute explanation that voters just won't sit still for.
Yeah.
And it's not just the politicians, right?
That's institute.
The incentive structures within these marketing organizations are entirely hardwired to those old metrics. If you are the director of a state tourism board, your annual marketing budget is justified by your visitor numbers.
Your staff's performance bonuses are tied to hitting arrival targets.
Yes, the entire financial architecture of the industry was built to optimize a metric that is now actively cannibalizing the underlying asset.
So the dashboard is essentially lying to the people driving the car. It tells them they are accelerating perfectly while totally ignoring the fact that they are driving off a cliff.
Which brings us to the nature of that cliff. Because if these traditional metrics are blinding us to the destruction of the product, what exactly is being destroyed?
The destination itself.
Right, but how do we conceptualize this fragile stock we keep talking about? To answer that, the sources take us back to 1968 and a foundational concept from economics.
Yes, we are looking at Garrett Hardin's theory of the tragedy of the commons. It is arguably the most essential analytical lens for understanding everything we are discussing today.
Break that down for us.
Hardin described a shared pasture, a commons, where multiple individual herders bring their cattle to graze. Every individual herder has a perfectly rational economic incentive to add one more cow to the pasture.
Because they want more milk.
Exactly. To get the full personal benefit of that extra cow's milk or meat.
Yeah.
But the cost of that extra cow, the overgrazing, the root damage to the grass that cost, is distributed across all the herders.
Okay, let me try to modernize this. It's like a secret local dive bar that goes viral on TikTok.
Oh, it's a great analogy.
The first 10 people who see the video and show up, they get an amazing, authentic underground experience.
Yeah.
But they each make their own videos.
Right.
By the time the 100th person shows up with like a ring light and a tripod, the cool, authentic vibe they all came to consume has been completely eradicated by their own presence.
Yes.
Because the benefit of getting the TikTok content is private to each influencer, but the cost of ruining the bar's atmosphere is shared by everyone, so they just keep swarming until the vibe is dead. They kill the thing they love through entirely rational individual incentives.
That is a perfect modern translation of Hardin's pasture. Now, map that onto a global tourism destination. The destination's experiential qualities, the historic cobblestone streets, the multi-generational family bakeries, the uncrowded sightlines of a cathedral that is the commons.
That's the grass in the pasture.
Exactly. Every additional tourist captures the full personal benefit of their visit. They get their memory, they get their photo, they get the social status of saying they were there.
Your Instagram post.
Right. But the cost of their presence, the noise pollution, the sidewalk congestion, the strain on the municipal sewer system, the inflation of local grocery prices that is distributed across all the other tourists and, most heavily, across the local residents.
So the individual tourist has no reason to stop.
None. The individual tourist, and honestly even the individual hotel operator booking their room, has absolutely zero immediate financial incentive to internalize the cumulative systemic cost of their activity.
We are overgrazing our cultural pasture.
We really are.
We are treating ancient, fragile cities like they are infinite fields of grass. And to manage a commons, you have to establish its limits. This introduces the concept of carrying capacity, which the sources break down into 4 distinct measurable dimensions.
This is where it gets really scientific.
Yeah, because we usually just think of capacity in terms of, like, fire codes, can we fit more human bodies into this public square before someone gets crushed? But the framework the OECD and academic sources use is far more sophisticated.
Let's unpack the mechanics of these 4 dimensions, because this clarifies exactly how the economic engine breaks down. The first one is the most tangible, physical or ecological carrying capacity.
The hard limit.
Right. This is the hard, uncompromising limit. It's the absolute maximum number of visitors a site can absorb before irreversible physical degradation occurs.
We see this with trail erosion at Machu Picchu, right?
Yeah.
Where thousands of boots literally grind the ancient pathways into dust.
Yes, or look at the water crisis in Bali.
Oh, Bali's a huge example. Unpack the water issue there.
Well, the tourism sector in Bali relies heavily on luxury villas with private pools, massive resort complexes, and lush green golf courses.
All of which need a ton of water.
Millions of gallons of fresh water every single day. The ecological capacity is breached when they pump so much water out of the ground that the local aquifers dry up, or worse, suffer saltwater intrusion from the ocean.
Wait, saltwater gets into the drinking water?
Exactly. Because the pressure drops, ocean water seeps in, permanently ruining the agricultural water supply for the local rice farmers. That is a physical limit. You cannot negotiate with physics.
That's terrifying. Okay, so that's physical. What's the second dimension?
Then you have social carrying capacity. This moves away from the environment and into the friction between guest and host. Social carrying capacity is breached when local residents experience unacceptable negative impacts on their daily quality of life.
So this isn't about physical damage to a monument.
No, it's about the sociological fabric of the community.
It's the hollowing out of a neighborhood. It's when a resident walks down their street and realizes the local butcher, the neighborhood school, and the affordable cafe have all been replaced by synthetic souvenir shops, overpriced gelato stands, and just a wall of lockboxes for short-term rentals.
That is exactly what it looks like on the ground.
It's when the constant clatter of rolling suitcases on cobblestones at 3 a.m. and the skyrocketing cost of living make the destination functionally unlivable for the people who actually sweep the streets and staff the hospitals.
And that leads right into the third dimension, which shifts the focus to the consumer. Psychological or perceptual carrying capacity.
Which is more subjective.
It is entirely subjective. But economically, it might be the most dangerous trigger for a destination's brand equity. It is the point at which the perceived density of crowds degrades the tourist's own experience below an acceptable threshold.
This goes right back to the Mona Lisa at the start of our deep dive. The physical room in the Louvre, the floor joists, can technically hold 150 people without collapsing.
Physical capacity is totally fine.
But psychologically, the experience of appreciating Renaissance art is annihilated by that density. If a tourist feels they are just cattle being herded through a turnstile, the psychological capacity has snapped.
The perceived value of the product plummets.
They go home, they leave scathing reviews on TripAdvisor, they tell their friends not to bother, and the destination loses its premium positioning.
Finally, we have the fourth dimension, economic carrying capacity. This occurs when the hidden costs of supporting the tourism sector begin to actively outweigh the economic benefits it brings in.
People always assume tourism makes a city richer.
They do, but consider the municipal ledger. A city has to spend an absolute fortune on expanded waste management, continuous infrastructure repair, emergency medical services, and extra policing just to handle a transient population that swells by millions every summer.
And if the tax revenue generated by those tourists is siphoned off by multinational hotel chains or tax loopholes,
then the local public coffers are drained. The city is literally subsidizing its own destruction.
any single one of those four constraints, physical, social, psychological, or economic, can snap before the others. And when one goes, it usually triggers a cascade failure. Which brings us to the ultimate cautionary tale in the sources, the absolute canary in the coal mine for global tourism strategy, Venice.
Venice is the textbook example of a complete catastrophic system failure across all four capacities simultaneously.
Tell us about the demographic data there, because it's shocking.
If we look at the data over the last few decades, the resident population of Venice's historic center has plummeted. It dropped from a vibrant working city of around 174,000 in the mid-20th century to roughly 48,000 today.
Under 50,000 people.
It is literally emptying out. The city is bleeding locals.
But here is the terrifying part of the Venice story. While the city was losing over 70% of its resident population, while the social carrying capacity was completely obliterated, and the psychological capacity was literally a global punchline about overcrowding, what were the traditional metrics on the mayor's dashboard doing?
They were going up. The international arrivals, the hotel occupancies, the gross tourism receipts, they showed continuous, unmitigated success year after year.
They were blind.
Completely. The traditional KPIs were completely blind to the fact that the host city was dying.
So the dashboard was flashing a bright, healthy green while the engine was literally dropping out of the chassis.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves mathematically that volume-based metrics structurally lag behind carrying capacity breaches. By the time a macro metric like annual tourism receipts finally starts to decline, the fragile experiential and social assets that generated the destination's value have likely been degrading for decades.
Venice's traditional data told the government they were winning the game, right up until the point where the city transitioned from a living, breathing community into an open-air museum.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have thoroughly diagnosed the disease. The old metrics are a lie. The industry is suffering from a massive failure to manage the commons, and the capacities are bursting at the seams.
Yes, that is the baseline reality.
The obvious question is, how are destination managers trying to govern without a working dashboard? What is their immediate defensive move? The OECD's 2026 report documents this sprawling toolkit of demand management measures. Let's start with the most instinctual lever a government can pull: pricing access, taxes, and levies.
It's the most intuitive economic response.
Yeah.
If you have an overwhelming demand for a limited supply, You raise the price to suppress the demand.
Economics 101.
Right. Venice recently introduced a highly publicized day tripper tax. It's a mandatory access fee ranging from 5 to 10 euros, required just to walk into the historic center on specified peak days during the summer.
Wait, I have to challenge the logic there. Does a €5 fee actually alter human behavior?
That's the real question.
I mean, if a tourist just spent $2,000 on flights from Tokyo or Chicago and secured a week of lodging in Italy, are they really going to cancel their lifelong dream of seeing the Grand Canal because of a €5 municipal fee?
The underlying dossier analyzes this specific policy quite critically, and the empirical evidence suggests that pricing access at that nominal level failed entirely to deter demand.
It didn't stop a single crowd.
No, it didn't. However, the report points out that the policy succeeded brilliantly at something else: political signaling.
Signaling to who? The voters.
To UNESCO. Venice was on the brink of being officially placed on UNESCO's list of World Heritage in danger.
Which would be bad.
It would have been a massive reputational blow. It would have sent a chilling signal to the global luxury travel market and humiliated the national government. By implementing this fee, local authorities demonstrated regulatory action.
They checked a box.
They showed the international community they were doing something. It neutralized the UNESCO threat, even if it didn't solve the crowding problem on the pavement. It was an instrument of geopolitical diplomacy masquerading as an ecological intervention.
Wow. It's a Band-Aid that looks good in a press release. But what about when a destination tries to implement a tax that is genuinely meant to fix the physical damage? Let's look at Hawaii.
That's a very different case study.
The legislature there has been locked in a fierce debate over a $100 million green fee. The mechanism is to charge visitors a specific entry or lodging tax and legally ring-fence that money explicitly for environmental restoration. Fixing the coral reefs bleached by sunscreen, repairing the eroded hiking trails, stabilizing the shorelines.
And the economic logic of the green fee is perfectly sound regarding economic carrying capacity. You are finally forcing the consumer to internalize the cost of their environmental impact.
So what's the holdup?
The tension lies in local governance and public trust. The sources highlight that residents and visitors alike are deeply suspicious of the bureaucratic machinery. Advisory councils in Hawaii and, frankly, municipalities all over the world often have a weak track record of transparency.
So they think the money is going to disappear.
The local fear is that this $100 million won't actually go to the trails and the reefs. It will get absorbed into administrative overhead, that vanish into general budget deficits, or fund unrelated pet projects.
I mean, that's a fair concern for any taxpayer.
Absolutely. If a government levies a tax and it doesn't produce highly visible, tangible improvements, if the beaches aren't measurably cleaner and the roads aren't better, it just breeds cynicism. It becomes another annoying line item on a hotel bill that undermines public confidence in the destination's management.
Taxes are incredibly tricky to calibrate. If the fee is too low, it doesn't deter anyone, like in Venice. If the revenue isn't fiercely protected, it loses public trust, like the fears in Hawaii. That leads us to a much more direct, less elegant approach: caps and reservation systems.
Direct, quantitative volume control.
Exactly. If manipulating the price doesn't change behavior, you simply close the door when the room is full.
We see this implemented at Machu Picchu, which recently capped daily visitors at a hard limit of 4,500. We see it in Dubrovnik, which instituted a ceiling of 10,000 simultaneous visitors inside its historic walled city, utilizing cameras and turnstiles to track the bodies in real time.
This maps perfectly back to our tragedy of the commons. If the open pasture is being destroyed, you have to build a fence.
This is exactly where the theoretical work of Elinor Ostrom becomes highly practical.
Remind me who she is.
She won the Nobel Prize in Economics for her decades of research on how communities successfully manage common pool resources without destroying them.
Okay.
One of her absolute foundational design principles is that a sustainable commons must have clearly defined boundaries and rules adapted to local conditions. You must explicitly define who has the right to access the resource and who does not.
And a cap does that perfectly.
Visitor caps achieve this boundary setting directly. A digital reservation system is the enforcement mechanism of that boundary.
Right.
It creates scarcity and it creates predictability. It sends a clear signal to the market. This is the ecological and physical limit of our asset, and we will not cross it for any amount of money.
But throwing up a turnstile and telling tourists no is a massive political risk. You are literally turning away money at the door.
You are.
Which is perhaps why Japan is taking a completely different, highly technical route. They aren't trying to build a wall to stop the river. They are trying to engineer a new channel to redirect it. Let's dig into the Japanese strategy of dispersal and temporal redistribution.
Kyoto is the most fascinating case study in the OECD report regarding this tactic. Japan has a unique strategic orientation. They recognize that inbound tourism is a vital economic pillar, especially given their aging domestic demographic, and it's a crucial tool of cultural soft power.
They want the tourists.
Yes, they do not necessarily want fewer international visitors overall. What they want is to forcefully redistribute those visitors across space and time.
The Japanese government isn't just talking about this in white papers, they are funding it. They recently expanded the National Tourism Agency's budget, allocating a massive 10 billion yen specifically targeted at overtourism prevention.
And they are deploying that capital into highly advanced technical tactics. Kyoto is utilizing AI-powered congestion predictors.
How does that work in practice?
These aren't just simple maps. They ingest historical foot traffic data, real-time public transit taps, and weather patterns to forecast crowd density. They broadcast this data to tourists via apps and digital signage, nudging them to visit alternative, less crowded shrines or districts.
So your phone tells you, hey, don't go to this temple right now, go to this one.
Exactly. Furthermore, they are actively working with transit authorities to redesign tour bus routes, physically diverting the flow of group travel away from hyper-congested peak zones like the Gion district.
Oh, wow.
They are also utilizing luxury accommodation taxes in imposing the highest municipal rates on the most expensive hotels to selectively manage flows and encourage a specific type of high-value, lower-impact visitor. It's a strategy of intelligent, algorithmic decentralization.
Okay, let's pause there because I have to push back on the core premise of dispersal.
Sure.
Does decentralization actually cure the disease, or does it just spread the infection to healthy tissue? Think about it. If you successfully use an AI app to take 1 million tourists out of central Kyoto and push them into quiet residential neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city, aren't you just obliterating the social carrying capacity of communities that were totally unprepared for it?
That is the exact danger and is a phenomenal point.
The central district at least has the infrastructure, right? The wide sidewalks, the public restrooms, the police presence. The quiet suburb doesn't.
The OECD explicitly warns about this unintended consequence in their 2026 report. Decentralization is not a magic wand. If you redirect tourist flows into healthy, unprepared residential neighborhoods, you can breach their natural carrying capacities in a matter of weeks.
It would be chaos.
Suddenly, a quiet suburb needs industrial waste management, increased emergency services, and traffic control infrastructure it was never designed to support.
So dispersal can backfire.
Dispersal only functions as a strategy if the secondary destinations have both the hard infrastructure and, crucially, the democratic consent of the residents to handle the influx. If you lack those two things, you aren't solving overtourism. You are just democratizing the misery.
That's a great way to put it, democratizing the misery. So when soft nudges, AI maps, and minor taxes fail to protect the commons, destination managers eventually have to bring down the hammer. Which brings us to the most heavy-handed tool in the kit, regulatory pressure.
This is where things get serious.
There's a 2026 academic study focusing on Florence that is incredibly revealing about the mechanics of this.
The Florence study is pivotal because it provides hard, empirical proof that policy works. The researchers looked at Florence, a city historically suffocating under intense tourism pressure, and meticulously mapped the city's condition against local policy interventions over several years.
What did they find?
What they found is a distinct shift in governance. Local policymakers are abandoning the passive era of just monitoring the situation with useless dashboards. They are shifting toward active, aggressive, governance-based management.
They are passing strict, localized laws, but what do those actually look like on the street?
The mechanisms are highly specific. We are talking about interventions like aggressively capping the issuance of new short-term rental licenses,
Mm.
or banning the use of key lockboxes on historic buildings to throttle the unregulated Airbnb market
Really targeting the accommodation.
and the commercial space.
Yeah.
They're imposing quantitative limits on certain commercial activities, restricting the number of low-quality souvenir shops or fast food outlets that can open in a historic plaza.
Trying to preserve the retail environment?
They are even enforcing behavioral regulations in public spaces, like issuing heavy fines for sitting and eating on the steps of historic basilicas, or banning the use of hard-wheeled rolling suitcases in the historic center at night to curb noise pollution.
Okay, but did the data show that it worked? Did the hammer actually work?
The data showed a robust, measurable negative association between these tourism-centered regulations and the index of tourism intensity,
In plain English.
in plain English. When cities actually muster the political spine to apply targeted regulatory pressure, the crushing wave of tourists slows down. The intensity cools. The study proved that direct regulation is a highly effective lever for destination managers, provided they were willing to weather the political blowback of using it.
But here is the deeply uncomfortable truth that all of these tactics, taxes, turnstiles, and strict zoning laws ultimately lead to. If you cap the numbers, or if you tax entry, you have to make a choice.
Yes, you do.
You have to decide who gets to come, because the math dictates there is no longer room for everyone. And this leads to what has to be the most controversial, politically explosive strategic shift in the entire industry right now.
We are talking about the transition to yield management. In industry parlance, it is often euphemistically called premium repositioning.
Premium repositioning, it's a polite corporate way of saying, we only want rich tourists.
Well,
Or at the very least, we only want tourists who spend a lot of money and don't cause trouble. Let's look at the mechanics of what is happening in Amsterdam and Dubrovnik. Both cities have taken aggressive steps to ban or severely limit ocean cruises from docking in their city centers. Why specifically target the cruise ships?
because cruise passengers represent the absolute worst possible yield-to-impact ratio for a destination's economy.
The yield-to-impact ratio. Break down the math on that for us.
Think of every visitor as a simple economic equation. On the impact side of the ledger, a mega cruise ship docks and instantly dumps 5,000 people into a historic medieval center, all at the exact same time.
Immediate congestion.
Massive physical congestion on the streets. They overwhelm the psychological carrying capacity of the site, and they strain municipal resources like waste management. That is an incredibly high impact. Now look at the yield side of the ledger.
You know how much money they spend.
Right. These passengers sleep in a cabin on the ship. They eat breakfast, lunch, and often dinner at the all-inclusive buffet on the ship.
Oh, true. They don't need a hotel or a restaurant.
They might step off, buy a gelato, purchase a cheap imported souvenir, and use the public restrooms. Their actual financial contribution to the local ground-level economy is microscopic compared to a tourist who books a local hotel for 3 nights and eats at local restaurants.
High impact, devastatingly low yield.
Exactly. From a pure destination management perspective, if you are forced to reduce volume to save the city, you ruthlessly cut the lowest yielding segments first.
Amsterdam and Barcelona have taken this logic even further than just banning ships. They have literally launched stay-away campaigns.
Yes, Amsterdam made global headlines by launching highly targeted, geo-targeted online advertising campaigns specifically aimed at young British men searching for stag parties, pub crawls, and cannabis tourism.
Active deterrence.
The ads explicitly warn them about fines, arrests, and the negative consequences of nuisance behavior, essentially telling them, do not come here. Barcelona is utilizing a similar, though perhaps more refined, strategy.
What are they doing?
They are explicitly focusing their marketing budgets on attracting high-spending visitors who prioritize cultural experiences, gastronomy, and environmental responsibility, while actively starving the party tourism sector of oxygen. They are actively trying to curate or engineer their visitor demographic.
Okay, I have to step in here because this raises a massive philosophical and ethical tension for society.
It absolutely does.
If every desirable, culturally significant destination in the world, from Florence to Kyoto to Maui, adopts this premium repositioning strategy, if they all cap numbers, ban cheap cruises, and raise prices to target high-yield travelers, doesn't global travel just revert to being an exclusive, velvet-roped club for the ultra-rich?
That's the fear.
I mean, we spent the last 50 years democratizing travel through budget airlines and cheap lodging. Are we now just replacing mass tourism with class tourism? That feels fundamentally inequitable.
It's a profoundly uncomfortable question. And your worry about equity and the socioeconomic gating of global heritage is completely valid on a macro-societal level. Restricting access based on wealth feels like a massive cultural repression.
But it does.
However, we have to look at this coldly from the perspective of a local mayor or a destination manager. Their primary fiduciary and democratic duty is not to protect the global citizen's theoretical right to take a cheap vacation.
Okay, that's a harsh way to look at it, but true.
Their absolute duty is to protect their scarce local assets, their municipal budget, and the daily well-being of their own constituents.
So they have to be financially ruthless to ensure the city actually survives.
The brutal logic of the tragedy of the commons dictates that if you do not find a mechanism to exclude someone, the asset will be completely destroyed for everyone. A destination cannot survive if it attempts to be everything to everyone at an unlimited, infinite scale. The physics simply do not allow it.
So premium positioning is just a survival mechanism.
By targeting higher spending, longer staying tourists, a destination can generate the exact same or even greater economic baseline with a fraction of the physical, environmental, and social footprint. It is a rational, mathematically necessary survival strategy for the asset, even if it creates immense friction with the egalitarian ideal of democratized travel, because the alternative is the Venice model.
Where everything breaks.
Exactly. The asset is consumed and hollowed out to the point of structural collapse, and eventually no one gets to enjoy it at all.
So we arrive at the ultimate question of the deep dive. We've seen that the old metrics of throughput are a lie. We've seen that current policy interventions, taxes, dispersal, caps are incredibly fraught, politically dangerous, or just temporary band-aids.
Right.
So what does this all mean? How does the OECD suggest we actually fundamentally fix the measurement problem? How do we build a new dashboard for destinations that tells the truth?
The OECD 2026 report, building heavily on their 2024 findings, places a massive emphasis on revolutionizing data literacy and granularity at the municipal level. The era of relying solely on annual backward-looking survey methods, hotel occupancy samples, and blunt border counts is over.
We need real-time precision.
Exactly.
What kind of precision? What are the actual new tools and sensors we should be looking at?
We're looking at a transition to real-time, highly granular behavioral data. For example, municipalities are increasingly using anonymized mobile phone positioning data to track visitor density, dwell time, and movement patterns neighborhood by neighborhood, hour by hour.
So they can see exactly where the crowds are forming in real time.
They are mandating the use of smart meters in commercial hotels to measure the exact real-time strain on municipal water and energy resources, tying that data directly back to capacity limits.
That would help places like Bali track their water table.
Precisely. They are employing advanced natural language processing and social media sentiment analysis to gauge the psychological carrying capacity of tourists in real time. Though the reports wisely note, we must be highly critical of social media data due to inherent algorithmic biases and representation issues.
Okay, let's play architect for a minute. Based on the underlying dossier and the OECD frameworks, if we were building the ultimate destination health dashboard for a mayor or a tourism board today, a screen they look at every single morning, what are the specific new KPIs that need to be front and center?
The dossier outlines a brilliant, multidimensional framework. First, we need a metric to track the social fabric. We could call it the Venice ratio.
The Venice ratio, I like the sound of that. What exactly is the math behind it?
It is a formal, continuously tracked ratio of the permanent resident population relative to the total tourist accommodation capacity, including both hotels and short-term rentals, in a highly specific zoning area.
So it measures the demographic balance of a neighborhood.
Yes. If the number of transient tourist beds starts outnumbering the permanent resident beds, that dial on the dashboard starts blinking red. It tells the mayor, mathematically, that the neighborhood is being hollowed out.
That makes perfect sense. It tracks the bodies. But that doesn't account for the economics of those beds. If a city turns entirely into Airbnbs, the service workers who make the city function are priced out. Is there a metric to catch that economic displacement?
Absolutely. The second KPI is housing strain. You measure the median local rental price against the median local resident income, specifically isolated within tourism-dense zones, not just the citywide average.
Because the citywide average might hide a crisis in the historic center.
Exactly. This directly empirically links the economic impact of tourism, particularly the weaponization of residential real estate for short-term rentals, to the livability of the city for the people who staff its economy. If the nurses, the cooks, and the transit workers can't afford to live within commuting distance, the service economy collapses.
So we have demographic balance and housing affordability. What about the actual physical experience on the ground? How do we measure the crowding without relying on angry TripAdvisor reviews?
For that, we need a density distribution metric. Instead of just cheering that total daily arrivals went up by 10%, this metric asks a spatial question. Can the destination keep visitor density below specifically defined crowding thresholds at 90% of its key cultural sites for 80% of its operating hours?
Oh, that's where the mobile phone tracking comes in?
Yes, it utilizes that mobile phone data. It is a direct, quantifiable proxy for experiential quality. It proves to the management organization that they are successfully managing the flow of bodies, not just importing the volume.
And finally, what about the locals? How do we ensure they haven't completely turned on the industry?
The fourth KPI is resident satisfaction. We take the model Hawaii uses, which surveys the local population extensively, and formalize it as a mandatory global metric. A destination must continuously poll the local community to gauge their sentiment, their perceived economic benefit, and their frustration regarding tourism.
Because if the locals hate the tourists,
If the residents turn hostile, the destination loses its hospitable atmosphere. The smiles become forced, the interactions become transactional or aggressive, and that destroys the core experiential product entirely.
so bringing it all together, what does this actually mean for the future of the industry? Are we throwing out the old WTTC metrics entirely? Do we stop counting GDP and arrivals?
No, we aren't throwing them in the trash.
Yeah.
The traditional macroeconomic data, the total international arrivals, the gross GDP contribution, the tax receipts, they're still absolutely necessary for national accounting and macroeconomic planning.
Yeah.
But they are entirely catastrophically insufficient for management.
Right.
What this paradigm shift means is that those volume metrics must sit alongside these new health metrics.
Mm.
A mayor needs to look at the dashboard and see not just that gross revenues are up 5%, but also that the housing strain dial is stable, the Venice ratio is balanced, and the density distribution metric is in the green.
It's about context.
Only when you look at the friction between those numbers do you have a true, honest picture of whether your experiential product is thriving for the next decade or dying by the end of the year.
That is a profound shift in perspective. Moving from a culture of extraction to a culture of stewardship, we have taken quite an intellectual journey today. We started by looking at a massive global industry trapped in an industrial obsession with volume, treating fragile cultural sites like they were indestructible factories.
Yeah, that factory mindset is hard to shake.
We explored the deep economic mechanics of the tragedy of the commons, realizing that destinations are common pool resources that require careful, localized, and ruthlessly data-driven boundaries.
We've seen how caps, localized taxes, and AI dispersal are all desperate attempts to reassert control over those boundaries. And we've unpacked why shifting toward premium yield, as socially controversial and uncomfortable as it may be, is often a mathematically necessary defense mechanism for the survival of the asset itself.
And it's a stark reminder to all of us listening. When you travel, you aren't just passively observing a destination like you are watching a documentary on the screen. You are actively consuming it.
You are part of the equation.
We are a physical variable in the carrying capacity equation. Our presence, our choices, whether we choose to take a high-impact cruise or stay in a locally owned guest house, whether we demand travel in the hyper-congested peak summer season or choose the off-season, whether we insist on snapping that selfie at the Louvre or finding a quieter museum, it all impacts the very asset we traveled so far to see. We are the system.
This raises an important question, and something I want to leave everyone to chew on as we wrap up. We've spent this entire time talking about how destinations need to measure themselves differently. But let's extrapolate this into the future.
Okay.
If a destination's ultimate competitive advantage in the coming decades is its pristine authenticity, its uncrowded spaces, and its fiercely preserved local culture. And we know that authenticity is rapidly eroded by mass measurement, mass marketing, and being featured on global top 10 lists.
Where does that logic ultimately lead us?
Will the ultimate, most coveted luxury destinations of the 2030s be the ones that actively refuse to publish their tourism statistics at all? The places that choose strategic invisibility over legible growth? The communities that decide the absolute best way to protect their fragile commons is to simply drop off the global dashboard entirely?
A completely dark destination, refusing to be measured so you can't be consumed. Now that is a fascinating thought. Next time you're stuck in a massive crowd behind 100 glowing smartphones, sweating in line for a monument, ask yourself if the best places left on Earth are the ones nobody is counting.